Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're here, as always, to guide you through some really complex, often challenging source material. Stuff that really tries to build a whole system, you know?
Mm.
And today, wow, we are definitely wading into a text that does exactly that. It doesn't just comment on the world. It lays out a complete code, a system for understanding it and, well, acting within it. Okay, so let's unpack this specific one. We're doing a deep dive today into the United Independent Compensatory Code System concept, a compensatory counter-racist code.
That's right. And we're mostly looking at the revised and expanded edition from 2016. But it's important to know, these ideas, this framework, it goes way back. Some parts originated as early as 1957.
Decades. And the author, Neely Jr., he puts forward this thesis right at the start. It's not just an opinion, it feels more like a prerequisite for even reading the rest. You have to grapple with this first.
Absolutely. It's the foundational claim. And he states it very directly. If you do not understand white supremacy, racism, what it is, and how it works, everything else that you understand will only confuse you.
That's incredibly strong. It's not just saying racism is a problem or even a big one. It's framing it as the central distorting force for all understanding, like a cognitive gravity well.
Exactly. It positions white supremacy, or racism, as the text defines it, as the single dominant source of confusion, of non-constructive behavior, really, in the known universe, according to this framework. And the purpose, he states, is very practical. This isn't abstract philosophy. It's explicitly called a basic guide, a code. And it's intended for non-white people, who the text consistently refers to as victims of white supremacy.
Right. And the goal is to give them concrete ways, instructions almost, on how to think, speak, and act, all with the aim of eliminating racism and replacing it with, well, with two specific things, justice and correctness.
Yeah, and those terms have very specific meanings in the code. Justice is defined as balance between people. Correctness is balance between people and things, which basically means whatever leads to constructive results. We'll definitely need to circle back to those definitions.
We will. But first, it's also really crucial to talk about what the source says this code is not. The author makes some very clear stipulations.
He does, repeatedly. It states it's not meant to promote dislike or hatred for white people. It's not about embarrassing anyone or belittling them. It frames itself as purely compensatory, a functional tool.
And another big point, the language. The framework deliberately avoids most common racial terms. No black, brown, yellow, things like that. It strictly limits itself to just white and non-white.
And that very specific narrow vocabulary is actually a core part of the code's internal logic. It's designed, the text argues, to eliminate what it calls racial classification confusion. That's one of the key strategies of white supremacy it aims to counteract. We'll get into that later.
So for our deep dive today, just to be clear for everyone listening, our mission is to approach this text impartially. We're focusing only on understanding the framework itself, its internal logic, its specific terminology, the strategies it lays out.
Right. We're reporting on the codified concepts. It's a system, and it's built entirely on accepting its starting premise, that racism, defined as white supremacy, is the fundamental governing socio-material structure. If you don't accept that premise, the solutions it proposes, well, they just won't track logically within its own system.
Okay, so let's start digging into that structure. Part one, the foundational concepts and terminology. Where do we begin with something this comprehensive?
Well, maybe with the scope. The code claims that white supremacy isn't just, one aspect of life. It argues it dominates every single arena of human activity, all of them. So the code itself needs to apply across what the source calls the 9 major areas of activity. These are basically the battlegrounds where this counter-racist action has to happen. And it has to happen in all of them at once.
Okay, what are these 9 areas? Let's list them out.
Sure. They are economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, which is specifically defined here as people relations, religion, sex, and finally, war, counter-war.
Wow. Yeah, that covers pretty much everything, from how you make a living to your spiritual beliefs to, well, conflict.
Exactly. And the underlying logic is because, according to the source, everything a non-white person thinks, says, or does is directly or indirectly under the influence, the domination of white supremacy. Then the Counter-Racist Code must provide guidance for compensation in all 9 areas.
So you can't just focus on, say, economics or law.
No. The argument is if you make progress in 8 areas but neglect the 9th, that 9th area will inevitably be used by the system of white supremacy to undermine all your other progress. It has to be a total approach.
Okay. So if the code is trying to solve a problem that big, how does the source define the most basic problems of existence itself? Does it boil it down?
It does. Very starkly, actually. It posits there are only two basic problems in the known universe.
Only two. What
Yeah.
are they?
The first is a lack of knowledge and understanding. Specifically, a lack of understanding the logical reason for existence, which the text equates with problem-solving and/or understanding the reason for one's non-existence. Basically, a fundamental lack of purpose or competence.
Okay, a knowledge problem. And the second?
The second is the practice of racism, which the text equates entirely with white supremacy. And crucially, it sees these two problems as completely intertwined.
How so?
Well, the source suggests that white supremacy exists because of that lack of knowledge and understanding. But at the same time, the system of white supremacy actively functions to promote and deepen that very lack of knowledge, especially among its victims. They sort of feed off each other in a loop.
Right, a vicious cycle. And the way out of that cycle, the solution proposed by the code, is the production of three specific things: justice, truth, and correctness.
Exactly. These are the pillars.
And we need to pause here, like you said, because these aren't just the everyday dictionary definitions. They're very precise within this system. They're framed as requirements for achieving peace. Let's break them down.
Okay, so truth. Truth is defined incredibly simply as that which is, just reality. The revelation of truth, seeing things as they actually are, is presented as the absolute first requirement for peace. Because in this framework, truth must always expose the lie, the non-truth of white supremacy, before any constructive action can even begin.
So uncovering reality is step one. What about justice?
Justice means balance between people, but it's a very active definition.
Yeah, this one seemed particularly active, as you say, not just abstract fairness.
Right, it's remedial. Justice, according to the code, requires two things. First, guaranteeing no person is mistreated, and second, guaranteeing that the person who needs help the most gets the most constructive help.
So it's inherently about prioritizing. It implies an unbalanced application of help to create a future balance. You actively give more constructive aid to the most disadvantaged.
Precisely. That's a critical distinction. It frames justice not as passive equality under existing rules, but as an active, almost targeted redistribution of constructive assistance.
Okay. Truth, justice. And the third one was correctness. What does that mean here?
Correctness is described as the highest aim. It's balance between people and all things animals, plants, minerals, etc. Essentially, correctness is defined by outcome, whatever produces constructive result,
Constructive meaning.
meaning contributing to the elimination of racism and the establishment of justice. If an action, a thought, a system produces that result, it is correct. If it fails that specific test, regardless of intent or appearance, it is incorrect. The entire system is constantly measuring everything against this standard of constructive output against racism.
That intense focus on constructiveness seems like it would lead directly into how the source classifies people and power. How does the code categorize the population within this framework?
It uses three basic types of people. First, white people. Second, non-white people. And third, white supremacists, who are also referred to as racist man and racist woman.
And how is white supremacist defined? Is it ideological or...
It's purely behavioral, according to the text. White supremacists are simply defined as white people who actively or passively practice racial subjugation against non-white people in any of those 9 areas of activity.
Yeah.
If you participate in the system, you fit the category.
Okay. And then these types are divided into classes based on power.
Correct. 2 basic classes are identified. First, the powerful class, which consists solely of the white supremacists. Second, the powerless class. This includes all non-white people, plus those white people who do not practice white supremacy.
And the key thing here is the automatic classification for non-white people, right?
Yes, that's crucial. The source mandates, it states as a functional reality, that as long as the system of white supremacy exists, all non-white people are automatically categorized as being in the subject class and/or the powerless class, regardless of individual circumstances.
So even if a non-white person achieves, say, immense wealth or holds a high political office, according to this code, they remain fundamentally powerless within the overarching structure.
Precisely. The code explicitly argues that using terms like upper class, middle class, or lower class for non-white people is incorrect and only causes confusion.
Right, confusion.
Because, the text argues, those labels are superficial. They obscure the fundamental power relationship defined by white supremacy. Any status achieved by a non-white person within the system is seen as temporary, conditional, and ultimately granted or allowed by the powerful class, the white supremacists. It doesn't change the basic structural position.
Okay, that clarifies the class structure. Now, what about power itself? The source identifies 4 basic types of power. This should help map out the hierarchy.
It does. First, there's all power, which is distributed to God or the Creator. That's sort of the ultimate background power. Second, and this is the most relevant one for the code's daily function, is superior power. This is explicitly identified as white supremacy. It's described as power exercised collectively by racists, and its defining feature is being supreme over all non-white people and things at all times in all places where the system operates. It's the dominant operating force in the known social universe, according to the text.
So superior power is what sets the rules and dictates the outcomes in those 9 areas of activity we listed earlier.
Yes, exactly. Below that is inferior power. This is the type of power exercised by non-white people who are currently in subjugation under white supremacy. It's characterized by a lack of ability, or maybe a lack of will, to act constructively against the system. This inferior power status is what the code is explicitly designed to help individuals overcome and eliminate.
Right. It's the state the code wants to transform. And the last type.
The fourth is immediate power.
Ah, this sounds more universal.
It is. It's defined as the basic intrinsic power any individual has to act effectively and immediately without needing permission from others. Primarily, this means the power to cause death or injury, either to oneself or to others.
So, the power of direct action, how does the code view this?
It acknowledges that this power exists for everyone, but it strongly emphasizes that immediate power should only be used to accomplish a goal deemed just or correct, according to the code's definitions. It should never be used for non-just or incorrect purposes. The whole point of the compensatory code really is to guide the individual in transforming their state of inferior power into effective, constructive individual action that strategically counters the superior power of the system, one person at a time.
Okay, so we've laid out the foundational concepts, the terminology, the power structures. Now let's get into part 2. The structure and stages of racism as defined by white supremacy in this text. The source doesn't see racism as just random prejudice, does it? It paints it as a managed system.
Exactly. Not random acts, but a meticulously managed system that evolves. The text describes it moving through 4 basic stages. This shows it's not static, it adapts.
What's the first stage?
Stage 1 is establishment. This is where white people actively seek to dominate and mistreat non-white people. The text says this is done primarily through deceit and direct violence. It's the initial phase of setting up the subjugation.
Okay, establishment. Then what?
Stage 2 is maintenance. Pretty straightforward. This is the continuous practice of racism, keeping the system going at all times and across all those 9 areas of activity. Just keeping the established order in place.
Makes sense. Stage 3.
Stage 3 is expansion. This involved promoting and increasing the number of non-white people who are made subject to the system. This could be geographical, taking over new areas, or it could just mean increasing the depth or scope of control over populations already within the system.
Right. Establishment, maintenance, expansion. And then the final stage, stage 4, which you mentioned the code analyzes quite deeply, this is refinement.
Yes, refinement. And this is where the system gets really sophisticated, according to the text, because the goal shifts. It's not just about keeping people subjugated through force anymore. It's about making the subjugation, well, making it acceptable to the victims, or at least getting them to tolerate it without resistance.
How does it achieve that? Less violence.
Less direct or overt violence, yes. Refinement involves strategically improving the methods of control to make racism more efficient and, crucially, as the text puts it, more acceptable to the victims, non-white people. This is done through highly sophisticated psychological means, things like flattery, spreading falsehoods, introducing status symbols or small comforts that encourage victims to voluntarily support or at least not fight the system they're subjected to.
So the ideal state for the system is when the victims police themselves.
Precisely. The less overt force needed, the more refined and therefore more stable and efficient the system of white supremacy becomes. Refinement is presented as the ultimate, ideal stage of racial subjugation from the perspective of the powerful class.
And this refinement stage seems to rely heavily on creating confusion. The source details 6 major white supremacist or racist strategies specifically designed for this. The goal is stated as producing maximum sophisticated confusion among non-white people. Let's slow down here and really look at these strategies. This seems key to understanding the mechanics.
Absolutely key. Strategy number 1 we've already touched on, racial classification confusion.
Right, using terms other than white and non-white.
Exactly. Using distracting terms like color or maybe culturally loaded ethnic labels. The text argues this deliberately diverts attention away from the fundamental white-non-white power dynamic defined by the system. So the code's insistence on its strict terminology is a direct countermeasure to this specific confusion strategy. Maintain clarity.
Okay, that's number one. What's strategy number two?
Racial population dislocation confusion. This is about selectively forcing non-white people to move from one place to another, specifically under conditions of great loss.
And the text makes a very sharp distinction here, doesn't it, between dislocation and relocation?
A critical distinction. Relocation, the text suggests, implies moving with some kind of compensatory gain, maybe support or better opportunities. Dislocation, however, is defined as moving with great loss, loss of property, community ties, job security, often triggered by deliberately created instability, like engineered food shortages, economic chaos, or legal changes.
And why would the system promote dislocation?
According to the code, the racists, white supremacists, promote dislocation precisely because it disrupts constructive value. It keeps non-white populations unstable, stressed, constantly rebuilding, unable to establish firm foundations for resistance. It's a tool of destabilization.
And the code provides a specific counter-instruction for this.
Yes, very specific. Whenever dislocation occurs, the non-white individual must always, publicly and consistently, blame the white supremacists as the cause of the dislocation, and then formally ask for dislocation compensation. It's a structured countermove aimed at maintaining truth and demanding accountability within the system's own logic.
Okay. Strategy 3 sounds quite grim. Racial population tailoring confusion.
It is. The strategy, as described in the text, involves the killing of large numbers of non-white people, not randomly, but on a thought-out basis. The purpose is stated as tailoring the remaining non-white population to make them easier to control.
So the implication is that this isn't just about reducing numbers, but shaping the remaining population strategically, like culling a herd.
That's the implication presented. It's framed as an intentional effort, often indirect. For example, creating situations, poverty, lack of opportunity, promoting conflict that are guaranteed to produce anger, frustration, jealousy, and violence among non-white people, causing them to harm or kill each other.
So the system encourages internal collapse.
Exactly. The goal described is to foster internal chaos that effectively tailors the population while relieving the white supremacists of the need for direct, overt violence or management. The code views this as a combination of maintenance and expansion maintaining control by engineering internal breakdown.
Chilling. Okay, strategy number 4, racial showcasing confusion. This seems like something very visible in the refinement stage.
Extremely visible. This is about placing selected non-white individuals out front, giving them prominent titles, positions, maybe some material comfort, lots of publicity.
And the purpose is?
To create the illusion that the system of white supremacy either no longer exists or at least that it's not victimizing those particular successful individuals. The primary function is psychological. To make other non-white people stop complaining or resisting. The logic becomes, well, if they made it, the system must be fair, so my problems are my own fault.
How does the code instruct individuals to defend against this type of confusion, especially if they are one of the showcased individuals?
The self-defense mechanism prescribed is quite severe. If a non-white person finds themselves being racially showcased, the code mandates that they must consistently, in their thoughts, speech, and actions, blame the white supremacist, the system, as the dominant cause of the overall situation, even while they might be personally benefiting from that showcase status.
Why? To maintain clarity.
To maintain cognitive clarity about the underlying power dynamic. It prevents the individual and observers from mistaking a tactical concession by the system for a fundamental change in the system itself. The focus must remain on the structure, not the exceptions.
Okay. 5th strategy, racial sexual confusion.
This strategy involves dominating non-white people by deliberately adding, subtracting, or dividing the meanings associated with sex. The goal is to sow chaos, conflict, and confusion among non-white people regarding sexuality.
And why focus on sex specifically?
The source explicitly notes that sexual activity is the second greatest motivating force in human beings, right after racism itself and its framework. Because it's so powerful, it's seen as a prime target for weaponization. The strategy aims to destroy the constructive essence and quality of non-white people's sexuality, often by encouraging non-constructive sexual activity that is perhaps culturally controlled, promotes internal divisions, like colorism or status conflicts related to partners, or simply wastes essential energy, time, and resources that the code argues should be directed towards counter-racist efforts.
Right, linking back to the idea of conserving energy. And the final strategy, number 6, This one seems the most counterintuitive. Racial white sacrifice confusion.
Highly counterintuitive. This is described as situations where white supremacists deliberately cause great harm to themselves or allow harm to happen to other white people, sometimes even involving killing other whites.
Why would they do that?
According to the code, the express intention is to confuse non-white people, to make them believe either that white supremacy isn't really the core problem, since white people are suffering too, or perhaps that the racists aren't monolithic or all-powerful.
Yes, a strategic loss.
Exactly. The source views these sacrifices not as weakness, but as a calculated cost of doing business, a necessary investment, or an acceptable percentage loss required to maintain overall control and legitimacy. The white supremacists involved are framed as master planners, managing the race war business, willing to sacrifice some of their own for the larger strategic goal.
What's the counter-instruction here? How should a victim interpret this?
The code explicitly advises victims not to view these sacrifices as a sign that the system is weakening or failing. Instead, they should see it as confirmation of the system's comprehensive, sometimes brutal strategic planning. The instruction regarding action is, provide constructive help to anyone who is suffering, regardless of their race, but never mistake the sacrifice as evidence against the existence or severity of the white supremacy system itself. Maintain analytical clarity.
Okay, so we've mapped out the problem. The scope, the definitions, the power dynamics, the stages, and these incredibly sophisticated strategies of confusion. Now let's turn to part 3. The solution offered by the source. This is rooted in what it calls the law of compensation. This isn't presented as a social theory, is it? More like a natural law.
That's exactly how it's framed, as a fundamental law of nature, of existence itself. Like mathematics, logic, physics, the core principle is stated very simply. A person compensates for his or her lack of ability by relying on the ability of other persons or things.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure. The text uses examples like, a light bulb compensates for our inability to see in the dark. Glasses compensate for poor eyesight. A calculator compensates for our slowness in complex math. Even writing things down compensates for our fallible memory. The act of living and functioning is constant compensation, according to this view.
Okay, so if compensation is a universal law, how does the code apply this specifically to countering racial subjugation? It breaks it down into 3 steps for the non-white person, right?
Yes, 3 essential sequential steps. This is the core functional logic of the compensatory action.
Let's walk through them. Step 1.
Step 1. Ask for what should be given. The code instructs non-white people to formally, constructively, and persistently ask the white supremacists, the powerful class, to do 2 things. Reveal truth and produce justice and correctness in all 9 areas of activity.
Why start with asking? Why not just act to take it?
It serves a couple of crucial functions within the code's logic. First, it explicitly holds the powerful class accountable to the ideals of justice and truth that they often claim to uphold. It puts the onus on them. Second, and perhaps more importantly, the act of asking forces the racists into a position. They either have to comply, which, given the definition of justice, requires eliminating white supremacy is unlikely, or refuse, thereby clearly demonstrating and confirming their status as operators of a non-just system. The asking clarifies the nature of the power dynamic and defines the resistance needed.
Okay, so asking sets the stage. What's step 2?
Step 2. Accept what is granted. This might seem counterintuitive too. The code says that since white supremacists currently hold superior power, non-white people should accept whatever the white supremacists choose to grant them, provided that what is granted is of constructive value.
Accept concessions. Why?
It's presented as a tactical move. The code strongly discourages wasting precious time and energy fighting bitterly over every single small concession or detail, especially if it has some constructive use. If it helps, even a little, accept it. But, and this is vital, you must then immediately proceed to the final non-negotiable step.
Which is step 3, compensate for the difference.
This is the absolute core of the entire code. After asking and accepting what's given, if anything, the non-white person must meticulously study the difference. They must analyze exactly what was granted versus what was asked for, which was full truth, justice, and correctness. Calculate that gap, that difference. And then the individual must act personally, individually, constructively to compensate for that difference themselves in order to produce the required justice and correctness.
So the burden of actually achieving justice always falls back on the individual non-white person, regardless of what the system does or doesn't do.
Exactly. The action required is not dependent on the powerful class's response. The required action is defined by the gap between the ideal justice and the current reality. The individual compensates for that lack.
This systematic approach, ask, accept, compensate this, gives us the full title, doesn't it? The United Independent Compensatory Code System concept. Let's break down what each of those words signifies in this context.
Okay. United. This refers specifically to the need for victims of racism to be united in their thoughts. They need a common goal, eliminating racism, a common logic, the code's framework, and common definitions, like justice, truth, correctness, to be effective. It's about mental and philosophical unity.
Independent. And this seems like the radical part.
It really is. Independent means that each individual victim retains complete choice of methods for how they resist or work to eliminate racism. There's no central command structure, no orders, no force compelling specific actions from others. Each person chooses how they apply the code's principles.
So unity in the objective, but total individual freedom in the tactics used to get there.
Precisely. Compensatory is simply the function we just discussed. It means to make up for what is missing. The code is a tool to promote justice, truth, and correctness in a system currently dominated by injustice and non-truth, racism.
And finally, code system concept. Why all three terms?
It suggests stages. It's a concept while it's just an idea being considered. It becomes a system when individuals start thinking according to its logic. It becomes a code when individuals actually start acting based on an individually chosen list of suggestions drawn from it, suggestions for their thought, speech, and/or action. It's presented as an evolving framework adopted by individuals.
This whole structure, especially the independent part, seems deliberately designed to avoid the problems the source sees in traditional activism. Which brings us to this contrast it draws between two methods of resisting racism.
Yes, the four-wall method versus the open-air method.
Describe the four-wall method first.
The four-wall method is what the source considers the traditional standard approach. Think regular meetings, centralized activities, formal organizations with designated leaders collecting money or dues, standard activism structures.
And the source views this method as
fundamentally flawed and ultimately ineffective against white supremacy. It lists several weaknesses. They inevitably suffer from personality clashes and internal politics. They waste enormous amounts of energy just on organizational maintenance. And crucially, they are highly vulnerable to being financially co-opted, influenced, or outright infiltrated by racists, the powerful class, which neutralizes their potential impact.
So the compensatory code is proposed as the alternative. The open-air method.
Exactly. The code is the open-air method. It's characterized by informal communication, no regular meetings, no formal organizational structure, no designated leaders, no collecting of dues or central funds. Every person acts solely according to their own individual selections and understanding of the code.
But how does a system like that maintain discipline? How does it prevent infiltration or sabotage if there's no structure to defend? That seems like a major vulnerability.
That's actually presented as its core strength, its structural genius, according to the text. Because there is no organization, there's literally nothing to infiltrate or disrupt in the traditional sense. There's no central body to take over, no treasury to steal, no leader to corrupt or eliminate.
So the discipline is purely internal.
Purely personal and individual. It relies entirely on self-producing thought and action based on the code's logic. The source is extremely clear on this. No non-white person is responsible for or should be blamed for what any other non-white person says or does in association with the code. It's just an individually chosen list of suggestions. If an individual fails to act constructively or understand the code correctly, that's seen as an individual failing of will or understanding, not a failure of the code or the non-existent movement.
Okay, now we need to get really practical. We've got the framework, the problem, the solution method. Part 4. Applied compensatory logic. How does this intensely demanding code translate into everyday behavior? The outline suggests we look closely at 3 key areas: economics, law politics, and education culture. Let's start with area 1, economics.
Right, and remember, within the code, economics isn't just about money. True economics is defined as promoting justice and guaranteeing no person is mistreated. It pertains to the sum total of everything a person says and does, especially how they use their time and energy.
And the source is incredibly strict about this. It lays out only 4 correct uses of time and energy for victims of racism. This feels like the absolute bedrock of the economic discipline it demands.
It is. The code argues that these 4 categories are the only activities that do not constitute a substantial waste of time and energy for a non-white person operating under white supremacy. Anything outside these is a loss.
What are the 4?
Okay, number 1, constructive production and improvement. This means producing, building, repairing, improving, and/or cleaning things, but only for constructive purposes that align with the code's goals. Now, 2, counter-racist study and communication. This involves studying, especially the code itself, writing, asking questions, and exchanging views, specifically on eliminating racism and producing justice in all 9 areas of activity. Basically, problem-solving work related to the code.
So tangible work and focused intellectual work. What about just living? Basic needs.
That's covered. Number 3 is basic necessities. This means eating and sleeping correctly, and importantly, only as necessary to maintain health for constructive activity, no excess. And number 4, which is often quite startling to people, relates to sexual activity. The code specifies engaging in sexual intercourse no more than 2 times every 7 days, and doing so using minimum time and resources.
Wow, only twice a week, maximum, and minimal resources. That is extremely prescriptive. Why such a strict limit on sex and also implied limits on things like entertainment or socializing if they fall outside these 4?
It all comes back to conserving energy and focus for the primary task, compensating for racism. The source views things like excessive entertainment, non-constructive socializing, and even non-constructive sexual activity as significant drains on time, energy, and material resources that the powerless class, according to the code, simply cannot afford to waste.
So it's treating personal life choices as strategic resources in the fight against white supremacy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It links directly back to that strategy of racial sexual confusion. By minimizing the time, energy, and resources spent on any activity deemed non-essential or non-constructive by the code's definition, the individual theoretically retains maximum capacity for constructive resistance and problem solving. Any activity outside those 4 uses is explicitly classified as a loss, a squandering of potential that inadvertently aids the maintenance of the racist system.
Okay, let's shift from time and energy to money itself. How should a victim of racism, according to the code, approach money and capital?
Money is to be treated purely as a precision tool. Use it only when necessary to accomplish a specific constructive purpose aligned with the code. And crucially, the text warns never to worship money or make its acquisition the primary goal.
How should capital be gained, then? What are the correct ways?
The source lists 3 major ways people gain capital. Only the first is deemed constructive. 1. Inventing something needed or providing a genuinely needed constructive service. That's the only truly correct choice. The other 2 ways mentioned are 2. Robbing or stealing, and 3. Asking, requesting, or begging from someone who already has capital. These are seen more as consequences or symptoms of the non-just system, not constructive methods.
What about borrowing and lending? There were some very specific, maybe even peculiar guidelines mentioned in the outline about this. Why borrow only from white people if necessary and avoid lending to other non-white people? That seems counterintuitive to unity.
The logic presented is based on compensatory accountability and minimizing internal conflict. If you must borrow, which the code generally advises against, borrowing from a white person engages directly with the powerful class, who collectively hold the disproportionate wealth generated by the system, superior power.
Yeah.
It keeps the transaction aligned with the core power dynamic.
And avoiding lending to other non-white people.
The argument there is pragmatic, if harsh. The source claims lending money between non-white people frequently leads to animosity, conflict, and broken relationships when repayments inevitably become difficult within a system designed to keep them economically stressed. This internal conflict among victims is seen as directly serving the interests of the racist system by undermining unity. Therefore, the rule aims to prevent that internal friction, prioritizing cohesive thought and action within the powerless class above individual financial exchanges that risk dividing them.
This logic of focusing entirely on constructive use and avoiding internal friction seems to extend even to the idea of ownership or possessions. The code forces a really radical redefinition of what it means for something to be yours.
It does. The source puts forward the concept of constructive possession. Under this definition, something is constructively yours only when you are actively making constructive use of that something, aligned with the code's goals.
So if you own a tool but never use it to build or repair anything constructive, it's not really yours in the code's eyes.
Correct. Or, if you have a house but let it fall into disrepair or use it for non-constructive purposes, you don't constructively possess it. Ownership is tied directly to constructive use, not just legal title.
Why this definition? Is it about efficiency, preparedness?
Both. It pushes for maximum efficiency of all resources.
Right.
But it also seems designed to mentally prepare individuals for loss, linking back directly to that strategy of racial population dislocation confusion.
How so?
The code explicitly instructs victims to be mentally prepared at all times to suddenly have nothing to lose, any possession, any arrangement with a person, any stability, and yet still be able to survive and persist constructively. This mental readiness, this non-attachment to possessions beyond their immediate constructive use, is presented as the necessary psychological countermeasure to the intentional instability created by dislocation.
And speaking of dislocation, what practical steps should the individual take to prepare for being potentially forced to move?
Two main things. First, always try to have a room or some place of compensatory emergency shelter available, however modest, a backup plan. Second, and this is crucial for the mindset, always remember that dislocation, when it happens to non-white people under this system, is never random. It is always the functional result of actions by the racists deliberately designed to disrupt constructive value.
And the required counteraction.
Is immediate and consistent. Always, publicly, blame the white supremacists, racists, for causing the dislocation, and then formally ask them for dislocation compensation. Again, it's about maintaining clarity on the cause of the problem and asserting the demand for justice within the code's framework.
Okay, let's pivot now. That covers the intense demands in economics. What about Area 2, law and politics, or as the code calls it, people relations? If the existing legal and political systems are seen as dominated by superior power, what's the individual's compensatory duty there?
In law, the primary compensatory duty is relentless, meticulous fact-finding and record-keeping. The true function of law, according to the code, is to guarantee justice. Since the existing system is deemed non-just by definition, as it upholds white supremacy, the individual non-white person has a duty to act as a counterforce by maintaining detailed daily records of any and all racist activities, thoughts, speech, actions directed at themselves or others they observe.
So they become individual evidence gatherers, creating a shadow docket, almost.
In a way, yes. They are creating a compensatory historical record, documenting the truth, that which is, of the system's daily operations. This record serves to reveal the truth, which, remember, is the first requirement for peace and the foundation for demanding justice. The source suggests individuals should prepare themselves mentally to be compensatory witnesses, meaning being ready to document and report instances of racism accurately and dispassionately, even especially in situations where the current legal system offers no recourse or justice. The focus is purely on truth revelation as a countermeasure. And furthermore, when engaging with the existing legal system, like in a lawsuit, the code insists non-white people should always seek the maximum possible compensation for damages caused by racists, never settling cheaply or easily, as a way of reflecting the true cost imposed by the system.
Okay, that's law. What about politics, defined as people relations? Since the code discourages traditional political organizations, the four-wall method, how does an individual act politically in this framework?
Politics here means achieving constructive people relations, specifically among non-white people. The absolute mandate is that non-white people must not fight, argue unnecessarily, or speak disrespectfully to each other. They must strive to use precise, constructive speech at all times when interacting.
What if conflict does arise, which seems inevitable?
The instruction is clear. If a conflict starts, the individual following the code should disengage immediately. Avoid escalation. Then, they should mentally record the details of the conflict: who, what, when, why. And later, they should seek ways to compensate constructively for the damage done to the relationship, if possible. The overarching goal is unity of thought and purpose. Any conflict that harms that unity among non-white people is viewed, within this logic, as an active contribution to maintaining white supremacy, because division serves the system.
It demands incredible personal discipline and communication.
Incredible discipline across the board.
Okay, final area for this deep dive. Area 3, which encompasses education, religion, and culture. If the ultimate goal is solving those two basic universal problems, lack of knowledge and racism, how does the code define what counts as constructive education?
Education, in the code's framework, is defined very narrowly and functionally. It is the study of problem solving. And the primary problem to be solved is racism, white supremacy. Therefore, any academic discipline, any field of study, any book, is only considered constructive education if it directly contributes to understanding and eliminating white supremacy and establishing justice.
So if you're studying, say, astrophysics or 18th century poetry?
Unless you can directly link that study to the task of eliminating white supremacy, the code would likely classify it as non-constructive, potentially even a waste of time and energy that could be better spent studying the code itself or acting on its principles. The mandate is for non-white people to prioritize the study and application of the compensatory code above all other subjects.
That's a radical reprioritization of knowledge. What about religion, another of the 9 areas? How does the code instruct individuals to engage with religious practice?
Similarly, the code applies its functional test. It suggests that the only truly constructive religion is one that actively promotes justice, balance between people, helping the neediest, correctness, constructive results, and the elimination of racism. Victims are advised to only participate in religious practices or institutions that demonstrably meet these criteria.
And if their current religion doesn't?
Then they should challenge or ignore any religious doctrines or leaders that promote non-constructive behavior, passivity, dependency, or excessive focus on a non-existent glorious past or a vague, unknowable future afterlife, anything that distracts from the present-day work of compensatory action against racism. The focus must be on solving the problem now.
This uncompromising focus on present-day constructive action against racism leads us directly to the code's assessment of culture, particularly its very harsh critique of what it calls modern Black culture. The outline quotes it as pitiful, primitive, stupid, silly, tacky, trashy, and our terroristic reaction to white supremacy. We need to unpack the logic behind such a severe statement, remembering we're reporting the source's view.
The logic, however harsh the language, hinges entirely on that definition of correctness. Does it produce constructive results towards ending racism? The code argues that ancient Black culture, or any past culture, proved functionally inadequate because it failed to prevent the establishment stage of white supremacy. Then it argues that modern Black culture, meaning contemporary cultural expressions, entertainment, social norms prevalent among non-white people, is largely a reaction to white supremacy, rather than a constructive solution to it. By focusing on reaction, coping mechanisms, entertainment, or superficial pursuits, many of which fall outside the 4 correct uses of time and energy, this culture, according to the code, fails the fundamental test of constructiveness. It doesn't prioritize and therefore doesn't achieve the elimination of the system. Hence, it's deemed incorrect and counterproductive.
So if existing culture is deemed incorrect, what is the correct cultural goal the code proposes? It mentions producing universal man and universal woman. What does that mean?
Universal man and universal woman represent the code's ideal future human. This is the person who thinks, speaks, and acts consistently to produce justice everywhere. They master and utilize the law of compensation to solve problems without inadvertently creating new ones. They embody correctness. This type of person, can only fully emerge, the text implies, after the system of white supremacy has been eliminated. The culture that produces and supports universal man and universal woman is therefore the only truly correct culture to strive for.
And the same relentless focus on present constructiveness applies even to how one should view their ancestors.
Yes, the logic is consistent. The individual's focus must remain firmly on the present and the constructive future. The source explicitly advises against bragging about ancestors or, conversely, speaking about them in a degrading manner. Dwelling on the past, good or bad, is seen as an energy drain.
So when should ancestors be remembered or discussed?
Only, the text suggests, if those ancestors were demonstrably instrumental in solving problems effectively, without making significant new ones in the process. If they exemplified constructive, compensatory action that aligns with the code's principles, then studying their methods might be useful. Otherwise, the past is largely irrelevant to the immediate task. The code demands an almost absolute present-tense, problem-solving, constructive focus from the individual. So if we try to synthesize this whole thing, this incredibly complex, incredibly disciplined framework, the code is basically asserting that justice, that very specific definition of balance between people, helping the neediest most, is the single ultimate non-negotiable goal. And achieving that goal is fundamentally impossible as long as the superior power structure of white supremacy exists. It has to be eliminated first. And the only way to achieve that elimination, according to this source, is through a completely new socio-material logic, rooted in that law of compensation. And this logic relies entirely, exclusively almost, on the relentless, disciplined, individual, constructive thought, speech, and action of every single non-white person, applied across all 9 areas of life: economics,
law, education, even personal time and sexuality.
Yeah.
And the code itself is offered as a personal, non-organizational guide for navigating that.
Yeah, the emphasis that really comes through is that individual duty and the intellectual sovereignty it demands. There's no leader telling you what to do, no organization to belong to. It puts everything on the individual victim of racism to minimize any time or effort spent doing anything other than consciously helping to eliminate racism using the code's logic.
It's designed, in theory, to be immune to external attack because there's no center to attack. It forces the individual to become their own leader, their own strategist, their own source of compensatory energy and action.
And the demand for efficiency is total. You mentioned earlier, if someone following this code spends, say, 2 hours watching entertainment that isn't directly related to understanding or fighting racism.
Then, according to the code's internal logic, those 2 hours are not neutral. They are functionally classified as time and energy donated to the maintenance of the very system they claim to oppose, because that energy could have been used constructively according to the 4 uses.
Right. That's the inescapable gravity of the framework, isn't it? The source basically posits this absolute binary. Every person, every action in the known universe is either cooperating with the maintenance of white supremacy or actively resisting it through compensatory action. There's no middle ground, no neutrality. So if we take that premise seriously, just for a moment, as the framework demands, if every activity outside those 4 incredibly narrow constructive uses is classified as substantial waste that aids the system, well, it forces you, the listener, to ask a pretty uncomfortable question. What activity that you currently engage in, maybe it seems normal, necessary, even relaxing, like certain types of socializing, entertainment, maybe even the education or career path you're pursuing? What part of your current life might this compensatory counter-racist logic classify as cooperation? Cooperation that is actively, if unintentionally, helping to maintain the very system the code is designed to eliminate.
That's the challenge it leaves you with.
Definitely something to consider, perhaps as you think about how you'll allocate your time and energy over the next 7 days.